Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening to everybody joining us here on the second of a three-series webinar entitled Best Practices with Applied Technologies in Clinical Trials. My name is Stan Kachnowski. I chair HITLAB and direct the digital health program at Columbia University, and I'm also a visiting professor at the Indian Institute of Technology in New Delhi, India. And I am really excited to have everyone join us here today to hear from Joanne Waters, the Managing Director at Information Media Corporation, one of the world's leading patient data engagement clinical trials technology companies, and Dr. Mark Butler, Assistant Professor from the Institute of Health System Science at Northwell Health here locally in the New York metropolitan area. And really excited to have folks tuning in from around the world. Just looking at the participant list right now in the webinar, we've got folks coming in from different parts of the United States and certainly different parts of the globe, given the importance of the topic and just given the appropriateness of the topic with what we are seeing post-pandemic with the virtualization of clinical trials and the work that we're seeing academic medical centers doing in ensuring that we have the best data on what patients are doing with their medications and how they're doing it, when they're doing it, et cetera. Because as we all know today, and as we've heard Bill Toronto from the Merck Global Fund, the president of the Merck Global Fund, the world's largest digital health fund at $1 billion now, Bill Toronto talks about data is currency. And it's not just currency in terms of capital, but it's currency in terms of valid clinical trials and safe clinical trials. And we're going to talk a lot about that today. And I really want the audience to introduce themselves and to make sure that if you're in the audience, drop your LinkedIn link into the chat so you can get to know each other. And certainly Ainsley, our producer for the program today, will drop in the LinkedIn links for both Mark and for Joanne. And really, that will be a nice way for you to not just have a little bit of inspiration from today's talk, but also some connection as well. But the topic is really, and what we're going to discuss today is going to focus on this idea around technology in clinical trials. And we know that technology in healthcare is improving productivity, it's improving efficiencies, and really enhancing the performance of clinical trials. We know that data and metadata coming out of clinical trials is vastly helping the clinical trials principal investigator and the clinical trial study managers, and at the end of the day, the sponsors, to see what's happening and what is going on with their patient populations, so that we can work smarter and not harder in clinical trials. And that's an important part of what we're talking about here today. And by the way, this is going to be a very interactive session, so please use the Q&A function to launch in any chats, any questions you have, any comments you have as well, certainly. And then I'll also be on my LinkedIn page. So if you link in and connect with me on LinkedIn, I'll be looking at that as well in case we have so many questions coming in, it gets too crowded, that sort of thing will be difficult. 2 minutes on myself. I chair the Healthcare Innovation Technology Lab, one of the world's leading digital health efficacy testing labs. We've been around for 25 years, and we've led over 800 studies and projects in digital health efficacy testing, and have worked with everyone from the World Health Organization to the World Bank, to folks like the Ghanaian health system, the Indian health system, the national health system in the UK, certainly most of the major health systems in the United States, all of the top 20 pharma in the world, and have worked really incredibly closely and rigorously with folks in the clinical and the clinical trials world, but also in the digital health startup world, helping digital health companies, digital health startups that are trying to test their technologies and push patients into these platforms to see if the platforms have the test and have the actual data and have the efficacy that they're hoping that they would have when they build them. But importantly, my background is focused really on education and teaching and research. And so this is why this series around best practices with applied clinical trials is so exciting for me personally. We're going to examine in today's program and then future programs not only different types of digital technologies, like different tools that are out there, but also wearables and devices. We're going to look at how they're improving clinical trials productivity, efficiency, and quality. Really important. The important thing to remember here, and let's not make any mistake, is that they are impacting in today's world, in today's clinical trials, in real ways. They're impacting how we're seeing the patients performing, how the data is performing. We're seeing whether it's remote monitoring or improved measurement of medication adherence. We're seeing better patient engagement. And we had again, Greg Bauer, a senior fellow at HITLAB, had a tremendous session. You can see it on YouTube with Joanne Waters, who's here today again, and Divya Yargulta from Syneos about this very topic. And you can go deeper into that. But we look at this understanding of technology and how it actually can support patient behavior within clinical trials, and whether the clinical trials interventions that we're measuring are actually leading to the improved outcomes that we're hoping for through understanding the behavioral modifications that participants are making, and making sure that those who are struggling and are less adherent are things that we can begin to understand sooner, and then how to provide tools and understand how we can pull objective data from this to conduct secondary and tertiary analyses and make our trials better in the future. And that's what we're seeing. That's the currency. That's the data is the new currency in clinical trials outcomes. And so here today is Dr. Mark Butler from Northwell, as I mentioned earlier, and Joanne Waters, Managing Director from Information Media Corporation. They both have extensive experience in this area of clinical trials and technology, and clinical trial technology. And really, I think I'm very excited to talk with them both today. And let's get some small backgrounds, again, some brief introductions to them. We'll start with you, Dr. Butler, if you can give the audience a short bio about yourself and your work, and then Joanne will pitch it back over to you.
Sure. So hi, I'm Mark Butler. I'm a clinical psychologist by training, but my research really involves behavioral medicine, behavioral health, and recently evolving into these types of digital behavioral interventions. So my primary interest is reduction of cardiovascular disease. So the behavioral interventions I've been involved in are behavioral interventions to exercise, to improve diet, and perhaps most importantly, to increase physical activity and medication adherence. Medication adherence being a big one that I've worked on as well. Yeah, that's my background. Those are the areas I'm interested in.
That's great. And Joanne, if we could get a little bit of your background as well.
Yeah, no problem. Hi, everyone. I am Joanne Waters, as Stan has introduced, and nice to see you, Mark. My experience is in innovative technologies for the last 3 decades plus, leading to the last 17 years working with information mediary, helping understand how patients actually take medicine and using that data to enhance research for research teams like Mark at Northwell Health and other research, and as well clinical trials and drug development. Very happy to be here.
It's great to have you both. And again, appreciate your time today. I know how busy you both are. And again, if the audience can take a look at the webinar chat, you'll see more information on both of these folks in the LinkedIn, on their LinkedIn pages, et cetera, on the webinar chat. So again, feel free to dive into that. And again, if the audience can, if you could also put some of your LinkedIn links in there just to introduce yourselves to everyone who's actually joined us today. And again, this is a very exciting time to be in this area and be in this type of technology. And, I guess really the best place to lead off, Mark, is talk a little bit about that. If you could speak start at like a 30,000 foot level and tell us a little bit from your experience, what you're seeing on how these technologies are making trials more productive, more efficient, safer, and higher quality.
I think it actually happens in a lot of ways. And it really, talking about, 30,000 foot level, also at the ground level, it starts in terms of trial reach. When you're traditionally doing recruitment, you're going to be sending out a research coordinator, doing it yourself, going to individuals, trying to get them consented, trying to get them involved. Digital technology allows for remote consent and onboarding, which, and assuming that you have your IRB approve all the things, you can recruit anyone from anywhere. And there's a huge concern about bias sample recruitment. If you're just, in your one little university town, recruiting the people that you find and are able to get, you may not be getting a representative sample for whatever you're studying. But digital recruitment opens that up entirely, and you can, recruit from as broad a sample as you're approved to. So I think that's really a great way to have that technology integrated. Something that I think is also really dear to my heart is data breadth and depth. So what I mean by that is with digital technologies, things like the ECAP provided, by Joanne's team, you can collect a lot of data passively and really granular data. So, with that medication device, you can know when someone is taking their pill, not just did they take their pill. And that's really important. Daily, sometimes multiple times per day, if you have a medication that has multiple doses, you can get really granular data on that dosing. When you can't always get from self-report, because people will lie and say they're taking their medication. That's what they're saying to their doctors, right? But in terms of actual adherence and actual medical outcomes, we know that most people are not adherent to medications. Most people are not adherent to physical activity and proper diet. So having technology help with that intervention really can drill down into that. And another thing, talking about the ECAP, but also Fitbits, is passive data collection, ease of data collection. So the benefit of the ECAP or a Fitbit device is it consistently measures data regardless of input from the participant. So you're reducing burden on them, but still collecting a lot of that broad granular data I was talking about. So, I think for the ECAP, a person just needs to fill their prescription to the bottle, which a coordinator can walk with them over on the phone. You don't have to be in person. You don't have to have direct. You can even make a video to show them how to do it. And I know that there are some onboarding materials that involve that kind of thing. So sometimes you don't even have to do it yourself. It's part of what the company provides when you get that service. And after that, the data is collected with no burden to the participant, as opposed to, even if you think about, for a simple questionnaire, the burden of finding a pen, picking it up, recording it on a set piece of paper, keeping track of that piece of paper, and then giving it to the research team. It seems stupid, but it's a lot of steps. And if you have passive data collection, there's no burden to the participant, but you still get that high quality data. So I think that is a huge, huge aspect. Text message interventions, another type of technology where if you send out intervention to someone, they can respond via text. You track what they respond, and you know the time it arrived. So you know even more information than you would previously. All of that kind of breadth and depth of data allows for adaptive trial designs, which is kind of becoming the bread and butter of what I'm working with and with the team at Institute of Health System Science, personalized trials and adaptive designs where the intervention is not just a set paradigm, it's based on the data you're receiving from the participant. So the data you're collecting is not only used to evaluate your intervention, it's used to alter your intervention. So what I mean by that is, for example, on medication adherence, providing someone with a feedback text message saying, you didn't take your medication as prescribed yesterday, right? Which is, a little big brothery, but that's the whole point, to have people with that personal feedback to let them know that, we're paying attention, we're tracking, and we're trying to help. And I think that that's a really a strong benefit of technology for research.
That's fantastic. And I think that the audience, it resonates with the audience, certainly here, that from what we're seeing and what we know. I think I'm looking at the audience right now on the participant list, and a lot of them are coming from academic medical centers, they're coming from CROs, and they're certainly coming from major sponsors. So that's helpful to hear. Joanne, is that from what Mark's talking about? If you could a little bit, just talk about your impact and what your insights and what you've seen over the last 20 plus years doing this. You've been around, you've seen a lot of different. You obviously IMC, Joanne has over 100 different AMCs, academic medical centers that you guys have worked with over the last 20 years. Is there anything that you would like to build upon in terms of what Mark said?
Absolutely, yeah. So a couple things actually. So let's just go down to the basic level of, he mentioned an ECAP. So what that is there are many suppliers around the world who provide these devices, these products, that do passive tracking, right? So they usually would record each time the patient would open the lid, right? And remove the lid, assuming they're taking their medicine. And so those are real-time timestamps and data points, which is what Mark speaks of for granular evidence for the dose removal of the product. Another one can actually take you down beyond a pill opening, but can take you to a blister card where each unit dose is time-stamped and measured, and they also know which dose was removed. And each of those products and those solutions have different benefits based on the treatment population. Patients can also have a bottle or a blister, just depends on the whole thing of it. But the importance is this: we're helping patients know that how they're dosing, so we help them see their dosing patterns. We're human, and like Mark says, we think we're doing a good job, but when we see it in reality in these beautiful, analytic screenshots that are easy to see, you're like, wow, I thought I was doing better than that. So it helps to modify the behavior and then the thinking of the patient. So we've been doing this for 20 years, working with research teams and health centers to help bring awareness to really what happens when we're not looking. And the important thing is, well, there's many important things, right? So Mark mentioned tech burden, right, to the patient. So we try to keep it as simple as possible, but another area of that is instruction burden, right? So when a patient leaves the clinic, they're like, oh my God, I can't remember a thing anyone said. And so when you just know that I'm supposed to take this pill once a day, you just do it. You don't have to look and say, how am I supposed to do it or anything like that. And then these text messages can help and keep everyone on track. So the whole point of it is this: these smart solutions can help researchers bring the granularity needed. And it's a real-time actionable insight that like behavioral researchers can see and bring that integrity to data and research. So it's really, really exciting, honestly. I mean, it's beyond exciting. And we're always happy to hear how researchers see the data. And a lot of it is surprise because they think, wow, I really didn't expect to see that. So it's pretty cool. Yeah.
That is right. It is kind of a new level of data, a new layer of data that traditionally researchers never see. And so the insights that can be gleaned from that can make massive differences going forward and looking at that. And Mark, let's continue talking about that, right? This idea of understanding patient behavior insight studies, and then being able to, try to understand how that's affecting the use of the molecule, or the use of the device or whatever it might be. Are you seeing different types of behavioral interventions and technology that you've been able to employ and deploy to make your trials certainly more productive and certainly higher quality?
Sure. I think that, a big thing that we've worked on, so a big focus of our center is on personalized trials, where the unit of analysis is not the population, it's the individual. So the way that works is you have a crossover design where you give someone one or more interventions and a control, and they receive them kind of in blocks of time. But you're doing continuous data collection over the whole point for them. And what your goal is to identify is which treatment works best for that individual, not necessarily what the treatment effect is for the overall sample or the overall population. It's really cool, but the problem, it's been existing around for forever. N of 1 trials have existed as long as research has existed, but the burden of them has been very significant, because if you think about it, you're delivering an intervention consistently, you're measuring your outcomes consistently, and you have to analyze all of that information at the individual level. So what we have done, and what I've been really proud to be a part of, is a bit of an automation of that process. So when we collect data for our personalized trials, it comes from multiple data sources, is downloaded, and then automatically cleaned, analyzed, and then presented to the individual in a participant report via a PDF that shows them what interventions they engaged in, what their adherence was to all of those interventions, and then what the effects of those interventions were on the outcomes of interest. So it's a lot of information, but the goal is to provide individuals with a lot of information to help select the treatment that works best for them. So for example, we had a trial that was actually just recently published in Harvard Data Science which was yoga and massage for chronic lower back pain. But we didn't just provide the individuals with the effects of each treatment on their pain intensity and pain interference. We also provided it with how it affects their sleep, how it affects their physical activity, how it affects stress, fatigue. And so all that information is important for individuals to judge what works best for them. So what we did was we took all of that using an automated data process, crunched it, and sent it back out to the participant. And prior to the technological interventions we've had, both in data collection and in data analysis and coding, that would not have been possible. It would have been far too burdensome, would have cost $1 bajillion in research assistant time. That's, of course, a joke, but very significant. So I think that is a real innovation that we've seen develop. This process has just been ongoing over the last, I'd say, 4 or 5 years. And it's been a really fantastic thing. We've been rolling it out and expanding it. We're publishing stuff on fatigue, sleep, and stress coming out, and we're going to expand it. So,
Mark, I do have a question about that. So when you talked about adherence and you're presenting that to your participants, so have you seen what we see obviously over many years of data is over time persistence clearly drops off, but when you can see a little increase, so let's say your participants started out with, I don't know, 65% adherent, which is probably about normal. Do you see a little bit of an upswing on there, or is it stay about steady, or how does that work with your research?
Well, I think it depends on different types of research. So for the N of 1 research, we're really interested in the individual's patterns.
Right, okay.
And so less important is what we want to present to them is during the month of March, you didn't really adhere to your treatment and your pain didn't change, respective to that.
Okay.
You did adhere to yoga. You didn't adhere to massage, but you did adhere to yoga. And that's important information in and of itself,
yep.
Right? Because if you're not going to use a treatment, why are we giving it to you? So I think the measurement of adherence using digital technology not only affects how you evaluate the effectiveness of your intervention, it also helps guide you in future treatment selection, because adherence is an important moderator of the effectiveness of your intervention, but it's also an outcome.
Mm-hmm.
So, I think adherence is a huge issue for medications, because if there's side effects, if there's a burden, even if the pill is too big to swallow, all of that is an important factor to judge whether this treatment is feasible for this individual or not.
Mm-hmm.
So I think adherence is huge.
Yeah. Cool.
And Joanne, I guess, the same question to you in terms of what are some of the metrics that you've seen in your career, since you've done so many of these things with so many different academic medical centers, that you've seen really help affect the improvement of clinical trials, both on the quality as well as with the overall cost run of these things?
Whew, lots of interesting real world data, Stan. So as an example, going back at least 10 years ago, within a V study, actually, it was a women's study for the Orlissa drug that got fast tracked through to the FDA, thank heavens. And what we had seen there we had used a blister card with our technology built inside. And when I say built inside, nobody knows it's in there. The FDA recommends to tell that, obviously, to the participants. However, it looks like a normal card. The patients were literally taking the card and pushing out every pill as soon as they got home. And that is very scary. And what that showed the client was a couple of things. First of all, it's a woman's population, and women are women. And we did not want to carry around a suitcase-sized clinical trial card to say, look, I'm in a clinical trial, oh my heavens, we're trying to be discreet. So we work with sponsors to help them say, listen, we actually don't really like the fact you're taking these cards the size of a 8.5 by 11 sheet, just because you're trying to save on costs of maybe our electronics hidden inside. So what happened is they reduced the size dramatically for the next phase. And that showed that there was no more what we call deblistering, where the lady participants were literally pushing out all of the pills. So that's scary in many different ways. It's a little bit concerning based on the cost of the stability of the drug, which you have to test, right? So that's why it's in a blister protected, because you don't want the drug to be degraded from the sunlight, from moisture, from anything else. And there's titration involved because you don't know if you're going to take, 200 milligrams, 250 milligrams, et cetera. So when you mix all of those pills into a card and then take them all out at once, it's like dropping a deck of 52 cards all over the floor. So that was one thing, right? And also if it was, we see in pain studies, patients literally are pushing out every oxy pill into a card, and we don't know what happens after that, right? And we know that one pill can really cause harm, if not death, to children, animals, whatever. So these types of things. But on the good side, well, those are good too. But on one good side too is we see that if you can actually increase adherence by just a 1% for and Mark, we for considering you're currently in one trial, but you're always thinking ahead, right? Of how can I use this data for the next one? And because that's how we are, right? I'll have all this data, I'm going to make it better for the next time. So we see that 1% increase in adherence, you can reduce your population requirement by a 2% and still maintain that statistical significance. So that's really cool in a lot of ways as well. So there's just a few examples, but electronic diaries versus these objective measurement tools, it's a no-brainer. People are people, and we say, I woke up at 3 a.m. I think I took my pill at 3. I'm not sure, but it was probably 1, right? So there's that's sort of thing we see.
Yeah, and I think anyone listening to this right now can relate to that. And it's so difficult to remember what we've done yesterday, and then we all know that 90% of what we did 3 days ago disappears from our memory. So these sorts of things and are fundamental to what we're doing. And Mark, when you're looking at the trial and the clinical trial as a part of a research continuum, where you need to have follow-on studies to really dig out the nuances of what you found in your current study, if you have enough data about a panel of patients and you can interrogate that data thoroughly, I'm guessing you can find additional analyses a lot better when you have the usage of the product, of the development of the technology you're measuring, of the molecule you're measuring, and the insights that you pick up from the patient populations are going to be much deeper when you have this kind of digital technology helping you with your clinical trial. Can you discuss a little bit with this audience what your experience has been with these type of secondary analyses and how it helps elevate your research and future studies?
So I think it helps in a couple of different ways. From the kind of coldest and most cynical, you develop the effect sizes and pilot data for future grants, right? So just understanding where you can go with what your intervention strength is. But beyond that, you have the potential to measure mechanisms of your intervention, right? So if you collect a lot of data and you can collect it via technological means, you can measure mechanisms of how does it build self-efficacy for taking medication? Is that the way that it increases medication adherence? Or you can look at moderators. There are just certain things like perhaps this individual doesn't take pills on a Tuesday. And if you have enough time points and enough data, you can really tease it apart with granularity. And also going back to what we were talking about briefly, those measures of adherence and feasibility that you get with granular data are so essential, right? Because Joanne's point of if adherence drops over time, and you have that, you can really look at those kind of trends over time. You can identify when adherence starts to lag and figure out maybe you need a booster for your intervention. Maybe you need a different type of intervention to intervene at that point. And when you have that kind of granular data you're collecting, you can really adjust that. And sometimes if you're lucky and you're looking at your data, not doing primary analysis, we don't want to talk about that, but if you're looking at your data over time and you have an adaptive design, you can work with that as it's being collected. So just all that wealth of data, you can do so much with it. And it's also a great opportunity for collaboration. If you have someone who has skill sets that you don't have, but you have the data, you can work with them. You can expand your academic partnerships. Students can work on your data. There's so much you can do. If you collect more data, there's so much you can do that you just can't if you don't collect that breadth of data.
Yeah, and I think that, again, Joanne, with what you've done as well, this kind of insight, this kind of commentary and testimonial coming back from your platform, the idea that you have, I'm sure you've seen this as well from many of your academic medical center and certainly large manufacturer and CRO studies. What have you seen in terms of seeing some of your sponsors and some of your customers being able to build upon the insights that they glean from your platform to build better studies in the future?
Yeah, we have one study that I recall fairly recently is from Dr. Wendy Gray. I forget where, but it was an ADHD study. And what she was studying was the medicine that the young adolescents were taking at home, and then they transitioned to the college, off-site, out of home sort of thing, and how that level of adherence, in the end, there's this gap, right? So when you're at home, it's almost like direct observed therapy, right? You're at home, mom and dad helping you take your ADHD meds, and then you go to college and it's a free for all. And I'm like, oh, I don't need to take my medicine. And so it's these types of studies too, these research areas, that kind of gap that really help us again to use behavior, modification to understand how these young adults during these transitions and how is their behavior. And it's also these interventions that will help them really stay on track and have a better outcome at college for both college education, but also, taking medication as they should. So that's just one example, but there's a ton of them. But that one kind of just rings because, when you leave home, it's a big, scary world. And medicine is really not at their forefront of thinking, but it should be because that's what's going to help them. Yeah.
That's right.
Yeah.
Yeah, go ahead, Mark. You were going to say something. And in the meantime, with the audience as well, if anyone has any questions, again, pop them over to my LinkedIn or pop them into the chat box or the Q&A box. We've got all those open. I do have one question coming in as well, Mark, and it again, it's around this ability to talk about some of the, more specifically, some of the other analyses that you are able to pull together with the kind of details that you see from the IMC platform and from this kind of clinical trial technology that helps supplement what you're doing with your current clinical trials. If you could talk about some of the data phenotyping or some of the moderation analyses, some of them were, what kind of analyses do you launch into when you're looking at the data and how has it helped you? And again, you've talked a little bit about how it's helped you, but maybe some of the more methodological tools that you use to bring that together.
Sure. So, phenotyping is a huge issue in terms of, my joking example is a person doesn't take meds on Tuesday, but that's a very real consideration, right? Because it's, you can identify phenotypes of individuals who don't respond under particular circumstances or under particular conditions, right? So maybe this individual has a really poor time getting access between prescription bottles, right? So between fills, maybe that's their pain point. And if you have a large period of temporal data where you see, consistent adherence throughout, and then when it's time to refill the medication, there's a huge gap. So those are the types of things you can look at. Those are in terms of phenotyping. You can also look at if a person if you're collecting multiple data sources, and you can look at someone who, okay, they usually take medication at work, but the weekends their adherence is terrible. Right. So when you have a full week's data and you have time points, you have analyses, you can look at those types of temporal things. You can also look at demographic issues, or, maybe the issue is really cost, in which case no behavioral intervention will provide to someone to get them to take their medication will help them if they can't afford their meds. Right. That's a pointless, it's a waste of your time. It's a waste of their time. They need something else. So I think the types of analyses you can run, you can look at temporal trends over time. You could look at latent class analyses. So those are where you basically do a factor analysis, but rather than, traditionally when it works, when you're running a factor analysis, you're grouping items together to form, like a factor. But what you can do with data points is you can use that latent class analysis to develop phenotypes of individuals. So we're currently working on some of that for activity to figure out when people engage in certain types of physical activity behavior. But you can do that with medication adherence. You can do that with diet, although diet is hard to collect reliably, continuously. But there are people who are working on that, but it requires a bit more thought than the adherence and the physical activity. Psychosocial measures work as well. We've been using text message ecological momentary assessment, where people complete text message measures of stress, fatigue, pain all throughout the day. So you can phenotype that as well. The important thing is being able to have that breadth of data to be able to then use dimension reduction analyses like latent class analysis, like factor analysis, to break it down to phenotypes. So, it does come back to, but breadth of data is great, so you can reduce.
I have another question around that. So, as we get older, when you're younger, you have a different emotional. So when you're talking about your diary, so stress and this and that. So when you're younger, you could be angry, you just hit, yeah, I'm angry. But as you get older, then that becomes less important. Let's say it becomes you're less emotional, or it depends, right? So do you include those types of things when you're looking at these phenotypes?
I think, so you can, if you have sufficient data, if you have enough people and enough measurements, you can run anything you want. You can, and the types of like the traditional moderated mediation, where you have a factor that it influences the relationship between a predictor and an outcome, but only for certain people. And that in that case, we were talking about age. Maybe this intervention affects adherence, but only for older adults or only for younger adults. And I think that once you have enough data, you can pretty much do anything you want, as long as you're specifying that this is an exploratory analysis. This is not powered for this.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay.
I think that's where we take this as well, right? Because we have another question coming in from the audience on LinkedIn, and again, it's around this idea of scaling. And so, Mark, when you think about this, and you're going back to the NIH for bigger dollars for your next round of studies, how has this data helped you be able to create a grant and create a study logic and really a thesis, if you will, around this, or a hypothesis around this idea of, hey, look, we had much more improved data because of this clinical technology platform, and how has that resulted in you in getting bigger and better grants from the government to do bigger and better studies?
Yeah, that's an essential point. We can't do this without funding it. I think digital and technological data collection provides you with multiple measures of feasibility. So when you're writing that pilot and feasibility studies section of your NIH grant, you can not only say, we had Cohen's D of 0.26 for our intervention, right? What you can say in addition to that is that we have X number of data points. We have individuals who are adherent on 86 out of 90 days to the intervention metric, right? You have a lot more granular data that you can report. And feasibility and scalability, what you have is really nice measures of the cost-benefit ratio for individuals. Which is, of course, NIH is always interested in. I'm not a medical economist, but and the cost effectiveness is not my specialty, but I know people who are, and having that more data to pass to them, to quantify the effect size, not just in the context of what your trial did, but it's a cost benefit analysis of this is what it can do at a larger scale, and showing technological interventions that improve reach to get individuals who are minority underserved populations, to show that breadth of recruitment and applicability, and also the fact that your intervention works for those populations. NIH is extremely interested in that. So having those types of details for your feasibility section of your grant is essential.
Yeah, I think that makes a ton of sense. It makes a ton of sense, in fact. And Joanne, from your perspective, again, having over 2 decades of experience in this kind of clinical technology adherence development, is there use cases and cases that you've seen with folks from around the ecosystem where they've been able to bring in IMC, and because of that, they've been able to bring out a much more interesting and a much better study on a follow-on.
Yeah, absolutely. So in your early comment, you mentioned about you're working smarter, not harder, right? And this is where these types of technologies really help with that type of process when it comes to clinical trials and research, right? So we could take even documentation, Mark mentioned handwriting a diary, which it still exists, right? They literally send out paper. And so when you think of the manpower that it's going to cost, and as Mark mentioned, the burden to the patient, people think, oh, it's easy, it's fill out a paper. You got to find the paper, like what he says, you got to get a pen, you got to be in the mood to do that. You have to have quiet because you can think. And then you've got to have PDF it or send it in by mail or bring it in and put it in your purse and then you forgot. It's like carrying around a shopping list. I write a list, I leave the house, I forgot the list. So it's these types of burdens. So then it gets to the clinic and then someone has to, the CRA, the clinical research associate has to, transcribe. Did Joanne write a 1 or a 7 or what is that? Is it an 8 or a 9, a 3 or a 4? So if you think of those inaccurate data points, right? Technology alleviates all of that. It also alleviates what they call reconciliation, right? So we have to, being responsible and de-risking research, we have to make sure the patient, if they got 30 pills, I want to make sure that I knew where all those 30 pills were, where they went and how they are and what is remaining. And so these digital smart solutions can actually do all that in real time. So it alleviates a lot of stress on the principal investigators that they can sleep better at night. The reporting to the FDA or to the IRB is all automatic and electronic real-time data. So that is an enormous benefit, right, to the trial. When you talk about like wearables, when you talk about artificial intelligence, if you're using these types of methods in your research too, again, you bring it down to granularity where these types of smart solutions feed fantastic data, reliable data with integrity into those systems for better interpretation of the data. And that's the real key there, right? Interpreting data in a phase 2, phase 3 study. Should I go to phase 3? Should I not? I don't know. Let's look at the data and then we'll decide.
That's exactly the right way to look at it too. So we've got a few minutes left. Obviously, any questions coming in from the audience, ask them now. We're set to close in about 5 minutes, but we're going to get some closing remarks from our guests here today. And again, here, again, I think we want to focus on the 2 or 3 things that you want our audience, our global audience, to take away from our session today. And again, we'll go back to you, Mark. And if there are 2 or 3 things that you really like to crystallize and make sure that folks take away from today's session, what would they be?
I think the fact that digital and technological interventions not only transform how you assess your data, how you collect your data, they can also really inform and change the content of your intervention. So when you're trying to improve health behaviors, we're trying to do these things, integrating the technology into your intervention will always boost it, as opposed to giving everyone the flat same thing. If you can personalize, if you can tailor, you're going to get bigger effects. You're going to get more dramatic, responsive. People are going to be more engaged with it, and you're going to get just better data. So I think that that's the main thing. And then my final point is kind of just more data is always better. You want to have a glut of data just sitting around where you can do things later. As you think about them, you can develop hypotheses, you can play around with it. You can identify those mediators, moderators, all those things that could be influencing how the behavior works in your population can really help you for the future.
It's fantastic. Okay, great takeaways. Thank you, Mark. And then Joanne, same question to you. What would you want the audience to take away, 2 or 3 key learnings you want them to take away from today's session?
Well, Mark mentioned, the integrity of the data, let's get some more data. So bringing these smart solutions, smart bottles, smart blister cards into the solution to provide analytics that our software, our platform can provide, Mark, in a split of a immediate second, you can see all of these, PDF reports you can provide to your patients, is this. These solutions are not complex technological hurdles necessarily. They're very easy to integrate and use and simple. And that is our motto as a company. We can do the remote patient monitoring where a patient's at home and literally does a contactless tap, and that data is pushed to a cloud where it can be interpreted and analyzed for actionable insights. If the patients don't want to do that, or if they're not into that patient population where they don't wish to do the remote monitoring and they still want to come to clinic or to mail it in, they can do the same thing. So all I'm saying is these solutions are very easy and really provide data that is just so fantastic. It makes your day really to see this sort of thing. And then in the end, it's to empower and help the patient.
It's amazing. So Joanne, again, major kudos to you and IMC and the whole team there for developing a technology that's helping to make lives better, save lives on a daily basis around the world. So congratulations to you and IMC for such a tremendous product. And Mark, thank you for joining us today. We know how important this is to you and certainly appreciate the time. And really can't thank you enough for both joining us today. And, just one key takeaway, I think, from certainly another member of the audience who wanted to make this point clear is this idea of making sure that everyone understands these are digital biomarkers. Like, we're talking about objective data here that is being measured. And that's important to understand because everyone's looking for objective, not subjective data. And when you look at this data that's being generated by this technology platform, it's objective data, which is so important to measure good clinical trials versus rough clinical trials. So I think, again, thank you all for joining. And again, I want to just congratulate you both on a terrific panel. Thank you very much. A loud virtual round of applause from everyone in the audience with cartoon hands and all the good emojis that can be sent across. And just to remind the audience as well, we have coming up on May 10th, another really the last installment of the 3-point series of this series on digital clinical technologies with Eugenio Zuccarello. And this is going to be an incredible conversation with someone who's at the heart of the data science of clinical trials and working with a major stakeholder in the U.S. healthcare system, CVS Health, on the payer side. And Eugenio has a tremendous perspective to add to this. He's a member of the Columbia Business School Digital Health Program, and we'll be talking to him and just a really wonderful person to talk to here. And so don't forget to register for that. And again, thank you everyone for joining. And special thanks to Ainsley Sheridan, the producer of the program here today, and Greg Bauer, our senior thought leader, senior fellow at the lab, who really put together the program with Joanne and Mark to make sure it came through as something that everyone would take away from and learn a lot from. So thank you, both Ainsley and Greg, on that. And until May 10th, we're looking forward to keeping in touch with everyone. So please remember to stay in touch with your HITLAB programs and your digital health evidence, because here at HITLAB, evidence matters. We'll talk to you later. Take care.